In the frost-bitten hollows of rural Wisconsin, where the winters clawed at the soul like a starving wolf, stood St. Agnes Church. It was a weathered relic of Norwegian immigrants, its steeple stabbing the sky like a broken finger. December 24, 1968, promised to be the coldest Christmas Eve in memory. Thermometers in nearby farms dipped to 20 below, and the wind howled through the pine barrens, as if mourning some ancient sin. Father Elias Thornwood, a gaunt man in his late 50s with eyes like smoked glass, had called for a midnight vigil. Not the usual boisterous mass with carols and candlelight. No, this was a silent prayer. God speaks in the quiet. He'd preached that morning, his voice a dry rasp. Let us listen. The parishioners, hardy folk who tilled frozen soil and buried their young too often, agreed without question. They filed in at 11 o'clock p.m., stamping snow from their boots, their breaths clouding the air like ghosts. There were 32 of them that night. Old Widow Hargrove, her shawl wrapped tight against rheumatism. The Larson family, Ma, Pa, and their 6 children, the youngest just 4. Young Tommy Burke, home from the draft, his uniform still smelling of Saigon. The Jensens who ran the mill, and their spinster daughter Ingrid, whose fiancé had vanished in the woods 2 summers back. And others, farmers, widows, a schoolteacher named Miss Elara Voss, all drawn by Father Elias's urgent plea for atonement in silence. The church was dim, lit only by a dozen votive candles flickering on the altar. No Christmas tree, no poinsettias, just the plain wooden crucifix looming above the sanctuary. They knelt in the pews, heads bowed, hands clasped. Father Elias took his place behind the altar, his black cassock blending into the shadows. At precisely 11:15 p.m., he raised a single finger to his lips. Silence fell like a shroud. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sounds were the distant moan of wind, rattling the leaded windows, and the occasional creak of settling timbers. Outside, snow piled against the door in drifts that would bury a man alive. The heavy oak portal was bolted from within, Father Elias's precaution against winter wanderers, those desperate souls who sometimes sought shelter in storms. No one had entered since the last parishioner arrived at 10:58 p.m. No one would leave until the vigil ended at 1 o'clock a.m. 20 minutes in, Ingrid Jensen felt it, a prickling at the base of her skull, like icy fingers tracing her spine. She glanced sideways, but the pews were still. Everyone was immersed in prayer, eyes shut or fixed on the floor. Father Elias stood motionless, his back to them, hands folded over his missal. Then it came, a faint scream, high-pitched, muffled, like a child's cry swallowed by cotton. It emanated from the altar, from behind the carved wooden screen that separated the sanctuary from the sacristy. Ingrid froze. Her heart thudded. Was it her imagination? The wind? But no. Heads turned subtly. Tommy Burke's jaw tightened. Little Lars Larson, the 4-year-old, whimpered softly, but his mother clamped a hand over his mouth, enforcing the silence. The scream faded, leaving an after-echo that vibrated in their bones. Father Elias did not turn, did not flinch. The vigil continued. 15 minutes later, it returned, louder, more desperate. A woman's wail this time, raw and guttural, as if her throat were being torn. It lasted 3 seconds, then cut off abruptly. Widow Hargrove crossed herself furtively. Miss Voss's knuckles whitened on her rosary. The air seemed to thicken, growing heavy, as though the church itself were holding its breath. There were noises now, faint rustles, soft dragging sounds like cloth scraping across stone. From the altar, from behind the screen. No one dared lift their gaze fully, though eyes flickered and searched. The candle flames trembled, their shadows writhing along the walls like mischievous demons. By 11:50 p.m., the screams had rhythm, short bursts every few minutes. A man's tortured roar, a child's sharp shriek, a wet, choking gasp. Each one came from the same place, exactly 6 feet behind the altar screen, where the sacristy door sat open just a sliver, as it always did, for airflow. Paul Larson leaned closer to his wife, silently mouthing, "What is happening?" She only shook her head, her eyes wide and shining with fear. The children pressed together, the eldest girl biting her lips so hard a drop of blood formed. In the far pew, Tommy Burke shifted uneasily. He wasn't unfamiliar with terror. Vietnam had shown him villages burned black with napalm, but this was different. Personal. Unreal. There was no cellar beneath the altar. The foundation was solid stone carved by hand in 1872. No secret rooms, and the door? Locked. The windows frozen shut. Yet another scream, longer this time, ending with a strangled gurgle. Something metallic rang out, like steel striking a chalice. Ingrid shuddered, recalling the legends. Saint Agnes, the young martyr skinned alive. Father Elias had preached about her that morning, her flesh stripped like paper, yet her voice never faltered. Still, the priest stood motionless, a statue. Was he breathing? At 12:10 a.m., everything changed. The screams multiplied, no longer single voices, but layers. Men shouting curses, women begging, children wailing. The sound of tearing flesh, snapping bones. The altar screen shuddered, as if something enormous was thrashing behind it. Miss Voss suddenly stood, her chair scraping loudly. Every head turned. She pointed toward the altar, her mouth stretched in a soundless cry. Father Elias finally moved, slow, deliberate. His face was calm, almost gentle. He lifted his hands. Peace. Continue. But peace was already gone. Old man Jensen rose shakily and stepped forward. "Lord, help us," he whispered, breaking the silence. "What sorcery is this?" Widow Hargrove shouted. Paul Larson grabbed little Lars and charged toward the altar. "Open it! Open that cursed screen!" Father Elias stepped in front of him, arms raised. "Stop! This is a test of faith!" Tommy was already moving. Quiet. Quick. He slipped down the side aisle and edged behind the altar. The sacristy door now gaped wider, 3 inches, maybe more. A wave of cold, foul air seeped out, smelling of blood and decay. Then, something moved. A hand, ghostly white, twisted, clawed, slid through the gap, dragging its nails across the wood. It searched blindly for a moment, then withdrew, vanishing into the black with a sickening, wet sound. The congregation surged forward, a tide of terror. Women wailed, men shoved. Ingrid Jensen fainted, crumpling like a rag doll. Tommy grabbed a candle branch, 4 flames, sputtering, and thrust it toward the door. "Everyone back!" he barked, voice cutting through the din. Father Elias whirled on him. "Boy, you dare!" But Tommy kicked the screen aside. It toppled with a crash, revealing the sacristy, a cramped room, 10 by 12, shelves of vestments, a small desk, a single window frosted shut. Empty, except for the screams, still pouring from the walls themselves. No, the floor, a trapdoor camouflaged under a threadbare rug, yawned open like a grave. It hadn't been there yesterday. Tommy had helped stack firewood in the sacristy that afternoon. Now, a jagged maw led down into darkness, rough-hewn steps descending into rock. The screams bubbled up from below, wet and frenzied. Paul Larson peered in. "Jesus, Mary, there's stairs." Little Lars wriggled free and toddled to the edge. "Mama?" A hand, small, bloodied, shot up from the pit, grabbing his ankle. Lars screamed, a real, living scream, as the fingers yanked. He vanished into the hole, tumbling with a clatter of limbs. Ma Larson's cry split the night. She lunged after him, but Tommy hauled her back. Below, the child's wail merged with the chorus. Father Elias's face twisted, not in horror, but ecstasy. "The atonement begins." Chaos reigned. 5 men, Tommy, Paul Larson, old Jensen, Millard the Miller, and young Henrik, grabbed lanterns from the walls and plunged down the stairs. The steps were slick with ice and something viscous, descending 20 feet into a natural cavern, the church's foundation carved by some forgotten glacier. The air was a furnace of stench, coppery blood, voided bowels, the sour reek of fear sweat. The space opened into a chamber 30 feet wide, lit faintly by bioluminescent fungi clinging to the walls like glowing warts. And there, God help them, the source. Bodies, dozens, piled in a charnel heap against the far wall. Fresh kills, throats slit, bellies ripped open, eyes gouged. Faces they knew, neighbors missing for years. Ingrid's fiancé, skeletal and eyeless, his mouth frozen in a scream. The peddler from 65, the twins who vanished picking berries in 62. But not just bodies, the living too, writhing in agony as invisible blades flayed them. A woman Tommy recognized as Mrs. Hale, long presumed dead in childbirth, thrashed on the stone, her skin sloughing off in sheets while she shrieked hymns in Latin. A man, no, half a man, crawled toward them, entrails dragging, begging for the knife. No killer in sight. The screams echoed from every direction, as if the rock itself wept blood. Paul Larson retched. "What is this place?" Old Jensen clutched his crucifix. "The mouth of hell." Tommy swung his lantern. Shadows fled, but in the flicker he saw it. Runes, carved into the walls, ancient and spiraling, glowing faintly like the fungi. Norse symbols. Father Elias's ancestors were immigrants from Trondheim, Jotun, giants, devourers. And in the center, a pit, 10 feet across, bottomless black, exhaling screams like steam. Henrik screamed first. Something yanked him backward, feet first, into the dark. His nails raked furrows in the stone as he vanished, boots and all. A final wet snap. They ran, back in the church pandemonium. Women dragged Ingrid to safety, children sobbed. Father Elias stood at the trapdoor chanting in Old Norse, arms raised. Blood trickled from his palms. Self-inflicted stigmata? Tommy burst up first, slamming the trapdoor shut. "Barricade it!" They dragged pews over, piling them high. But the screams persisted, muffled now, vibrating through the floorboards. "You knew!" Tommy roared, grabbing Father Elias by the cassock. "That hole wasn't there." The priest's eyes gleamed. "It was always there, boy." The church was built over the hungering maw, a rift to Niflheim, the underworld of frost giants. Every winter it wakes, hungers, demands blood tithe. "Lies," Ma Larson spat, cradling her husband's corpse. Pa had been pulled down in the retreat, his screams still echoing. "Not lies," Father Elias whispered. "Tradition. Every solstice, we fed it stragglers, the missing. But this year, atonement for all. I opened it at dusk. The silent vigil was the lure." Gasps rippled through the survivors. 24 left now, 8 lost below. Widow Hargrove lunged with a candlestick, but Elias sidestepped impossibly fast. The maw chooses the pure first, the children, the faithful. As if summoned, the floor buckled. Cracks spider-webbed outward from the altar. Hands, dozens, burst through the wood, pale and elongated, fingers like talons. They seized little ones first, the Larson girl, 2 Jensen grandkids, pulled them under in sprays of blood and splintered pews. Screams, real and spectral, merged into one endless wail. Tommy shoved survivors toward the door. Out, now! But the bolt was frozen shut, snow-packed. Millard battered it with a hymnal stand. Nothing. Ingrid revived, pointed. The windows! They smashed the leaded glass with chairs. Frigid wind howled in, snow whipping like knives. One by one, they climbed out. Old, young, wounded, dropping 5 feet into drifts. Tommy lingered, facing Elias. The priest knelt by the widening fissure, now a gaping wound in the floor. Below, the pit pulsed with red light, faces pressing against impossible depths, screaming parishioners, their bodies contorting in eternal flaying. You can still repent, Tommy growled, axe from the woodpile in hand. Elias laughed, a wet, bubbling sound. Repent? I am its voice. He slashed his own throat with a hidden chalice knife. Blood poured into the maw, and it drank greedily, the screams peaking in ecstasy. Tommy swung. The blade bit deep into Elias's neck, severing head from body. But as the priest's corpse toppled, the head rolled toward the pit, and kept rolling, grinning, into the dark. The church groaned, walls cracking. Tommy dove for the window, just as the floor collapsed entirely. Outside, 19 survivors huddled in the snow, the church imploding behind them in a roar of timber and stone. The ground swallowed it whole, leaving a crater steaming with unnatural heat. Little Lars, miraculously, crawled from the rubble, skin blanched white, eyes vacant. He spoke no more that night, but whispered to Ingrid later. The mouths, so many mouths, eating from inside. They stumbled to the Larson farm a mile away, pounding on doors until lights flared. Word spread. By dawn, state troopers arrived, flashlights piercing the dawn. The crater was there, 50 feet wide, edges smooth as if melted. No bodies, no trapdoor, just echoes. Searches yielded nothing. The missing 32 vanished. Father Elias's rectory held journals, decades of entries. 1912, 14 fed, 1933, 27, always winter, always silent vigils. Tommy enlisted again weeks later, shipping to Nam to outrun the nightmares. He died in a tunnel rat op, axe in hand, muttering of mouths. Ingrid Jensen married, had kids, but every December 24th, she'd bolt the doors at 11:15 p.m. and sit in silence, listening. Sometimes faintly from the basement, the crater filled with snow by spring. Farmers avoided it. Kids dared each other to scream into it. But on cold nights, when the wind dies, the echoes rise. Layered screams from below, as if a church full of souls still prays in eternal silence. No one entered, no one left. The massacre endures.